Well, thank you all for joining us for this virtual meetup today. We are very excited to have the opportunity for you to join us and learn a bit about some student-centered learning policies that are happening across the country and how they might be potentially applied in Pennsylvania. So just what we're going to do is give some quick introductions, I know for this particular group, we have some folks who've been engaging with the work that we've been doing for the last several months. We have some folks that may be joining that haven't been familiar with the work, so we're going to give a brief overview of ourselves, the organization Remake Learning, and then a bit more about the work that we're undertaking before we get to our actual participants. So to start off, my name is John Elfuth, and I am the Director of State Policy at KnowledgeWorks, and I will be the initial moderator today. And forgive me, I was hitting go without realizing it. And then I'll let my colleague Emily introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Brixey. I'm a senior manager here at KnowledgeWorks, and today I will be primarily facilitating our conversation.
Great, thanks, Emily. So just a brief overview about KnowledgeWorks. So we are a national foundation that is based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we've been working to create the future of learning for the past 20 years. We're committed to a systems approach to advancing the future of learning so that every learner has access to the tools, supports, and experiences that they need to graduate ready for what comes next. And then through our work, we engage in partnerships with local school districts and state-level policymakers across the country to advance policies that support personalized, competency-based education. So with this specific project, it is focused on what we're calling the Personalized Learning Working Group. Is a collaboration between ourselves and an organization known as Remake Learning that's focused in Southwest Pennsylvania. So Remake Learning is a free peer network for educators and innovators that is based in the greater Pittsburgh region. They help connect people, projects, organizations, trying to make it easier in general for folks to share best practices and collaborate with new ideas, as well as find funding and professional learning that is focused on engaging and relevant and equitable learning. So as I mentioned, we're facilitating the Personalized Learning Working Group together, and this is actually split into two sorts of groups. It is mixed between policy and practice, and is comprised of a diverse mix of education and community leaders around the region. So the whole goal of it is to ground it in a preferred future for education in the region, as well as statewide for the policy group. And then this webinar specifically is part of a series designed both for these groups and for folks in the state more generally to expand their knowledge of how to expand this work in Pennsylvania. And I'll just pause here for a moment. You can see up on the screen, these are some of the goals of the Personalized Learning Working Group, as well as the vision to make it so that throughout the region and state, personalized learning honors the voice, potential, and dignity of every learner through authentic connections and engagement. So before I hand things off to my colleague Emily to introduce our excellent panelists today, I just want to highlight the three key objectives that we have designed for this webinar. First, we really hope that it will deepen all of the participants' understanding of the process of advocating for policy change. Second, we hope that it will help the participants learn about strategies that they can implement in Southwest Pennsylvania, as well as the state more broadly, based off of some of the examples that we're going to be featuring today from other states. And third, we hope that it will give you an opportunity to connect to some folks in other states that are pursuing similar work, as well as perhaps some other Pennsylvania people who have joined the webinar and who might be similarly minded. So with that in mind, I will hand things off to my colleague Emily, who's going to introduce our panelists, and then we will transition over to them because you want to hear from them, not us, at the end of the day. So Emily, floor is yours.
Exactly. Thanks, John. I know I'm really excited to hear from our speakers today. So these individuals have firsthand experience in advocating for student-centered learning policies, and I hope that we can all gain some lessons from having them share their experiences today. We have two speakers who are going to discuss their work around creating a vision for personalized learning and mobilizing networks and stakeholders to make progress towards their vision in Minnesota using grassroots efforts. So joining us today to discuss these efforts in Minnesota are Lucy Payne and Barb Duffrin. Lucy is the school board chair for the Mahtomedi Public School area, and Barb is the superintendent of the Mahtomedi Public Schools. And then we'll hear from David Cook, who is the Director of Innovation with the Kentucky Department of Education. And David was an integral part of driving personalized learning policy in Kentucky from a state level position. So just so participants know, for format today, we're going to give our three speakers some time to give us some background information and share a bit about their experiences before moving on to questions. And our presenters really wanted to make sure that we had a lot of time to answer questions from attendees so they can really dive into what you all are most interested in. So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. And I encourage you all to be thinking about some good questions to ask our panelists. And with that, I think we're ready to get to the reason that we're all here today. So Barb and Lucy, I will pass it off to you to get us started.
Okay, well, thank you. Let me just take a second here to share our screen. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Again, I'm Barb Duffrin. I'm the superintendent for Mahtomedi Public Schools, and Emily did a fabulous job pronouncing Mahtomedi. I know that was a concern. And to begin with, I am going to share some of the work that I did, that I was involved in prior to joining Mahtomedi. And then I'll hand it off to Lucy, who has been doing a lot of our advocacy work most recently in Mahtomedi. So this all began for us, for Lucy and me, back quite a few years ago, actually. And so when I was, prior to joining Mahtomedi Public Schools as the superintendent, I was the assistant superintendent in Farmington in Minnesota as well. And in our strategic planning process, which was really it involved over 100 people in our community to come together, and we call it really a community strategic plan for our schools. And together through this process, the community was really calling for a different design for education, one that was more personalized, where there was a real focus on anytime, anywhere learning, which led to this one-to-one device implementation in our district, and really talking a lot about flexibly paced coursework and multi-age classes. That's what came through from the families and the community members in Farmington, what they wanted for their schools. It was also the case that in 2016, our metro area schools, I'm sorry, I don't remember how many participated, but all through the Minneapolis-St. Paul area came together and did a real community process around Reimagine, we call Reimagine Minnesota, bringing together community members throughout the metro area to also talk about what do we want for our schools. And through that, the themes came through community, bridges to the community, personalized learning, amplifying student voice, cultural competence, inclusivity, and the three phrases, see all, serve all, support all. So this came through from community members throughout the metro area saying, we want a redesign. We want to see something different for our schools. That work continues as well. And then in Mahtomedi, I joined Mahtomedi in 2018, and we went through a strategic planning process, like once again, bringing together community members. And again, the things that came through there, the themes there were around student agency, really student-driven career and passion exploration, and flexible schedule and school days. So even though each time we did the strategic planning process, something a little different came out, you can also see that there was a lot of common themes around personalized learning and student-centered work. Throughout this time, there was also collaboration going on. So while our districts created strategic plans, we also saw other collaborations happening throughout the with other districts. So for example, innovation zones pilot. So our district in Farmington paired with another district, another metro area district about, 40 miles away, actually on the north side of town, around this idea of an innovation zone, really intending to allow for some flexibility, statutory flexibility. And we focused a lot on inter-district staffing and anytime, anywhere learning. And this was a pilot program through the legislature where we were supposed to be freed from the barriers, the things that get in the way of us really designing a new learning experience. We did not experience that freedom. We were told that's what it would be, but every time we went to the Department of Education and asked for that freedom, we were always told, here are the forms to fill out, you need a waiver. So I will say that wasn't as successful as we had hoped. At the same time, then we had this personalized learning cohort, and which led to a multi-district personalized learning summit. And this is actually this time is actually where I got to know KnowledgeWorks and started connecting with Lori Phillips around more of the professional learning. She really started helping us a lot with in Farmington around the professional learning we needed to personalize. Again, Reimagine Minnesota, that was happening at the same time with community convenings that led to 9 strategies that were focused on creating equity and excellence in education for all students. And then along this is where KnowledgeWorks got involved with, this is where Lucy met KnowledgeWorks on the conversations on the future of learning. And in this case, it was the University of St. Thomas, Education Evolving, KnowledgeWorks, Education Reimagined. The Bush Foundation is supported quite a bit of the work here in Minnesota, and I believe in North Dakota, and then INACOL as well, now the Aurora Institute. So this has been a long process of quite a few of communities calling for change and also collaborations throughout the state of Minnesota with policy and professional learning, I'd say. Again, we also, another way that we had policy advocacy and collaboration were through a number of our professional organizations. So throughout this whole process, throughout the advocacy for more student-centered learning, we had AMSD, which is the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, lobbying, the Minnesota School Boards Association, the Minnesota Association of School Administrators, and Education Evolving, all working together on advancing student-centered learning. In the beginning, there was a lot of work around teacher-powered schools as well, and that was where Education Minnesota came into play as well. And the idea of really the agents of this change really needs to be our students and our teachers being the agents of this change. And so through that, in my work as well, we had some grants and some advocacy from Education Minnesota around teacher-powered schools. So Lucy, I'm going to hand it off to Lucy to talk about specifically the work that we've been involved in here in Mahtomedi in our policy advocacy.
Thanks, Barb. So a couple of pieces I'm going to refer back to is that Conversations on Learning is where I met KnowledgeWorks, is where I met Barb for the first time as well. And so I kind of came into the middle of the conversation, I feel like sometimes, but at a point where we were trying to become more specific with the advocacy and policy work. So the groups involved, Education Evolving especially, was very much involved with the competency-based education bill. They had bill language, they had support in the House and the Senate, but it wasn't making much progress. The other thing we had going on, as Barb talked about, is we had a strategic plan in our district. And then we had COVID happen. And there are a lot of things that happened during COVID that the state granted a lot of flexibility around, but then we were just trying to say which flexibilities help us as we think about the future of learning. So as a district, we thought a lot about that, and we started thinking about the instructional hour and the roadblocks we were coming up with that, and seeing instructional hour as this little piece that we could sort of go after to start to break the bigger systems change that we weren't able to do with the competency-based education bill. So you can see the why there, I covered those things. And the idea was originally to eliminate the definition of instructional hour in our state statutes, but then through conversations with KnowledgeWorks and looking at other states, we decided what we need to do is really change the definition of instructional hour. So Barb, go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So as a school board chair, we have a process through our state school board association where we do grassroots advocating. And so we wanted this instructional hour work to be coming from not just one school board, but from the state association. And so we worked through this process. Our association has a government relations team, our 2 lobbyists who work in St. Paul at the Capitol. And so we started meeting with them and having conversations with them about how would we do this? How would we write a resolution to take to this larger body for approval? As we're drafting that resolution to take for approval, we started talking again with KnowledgeWorks. Anne was very instrumental in those conversations, and Carla, in helping us with the research and the background pieces. We found a resolution from a previous year from another school board, Lakeville Public Schools. They had a resolution that was very similar that actually failed at the MSBA Delegate Assembly. So we talked to Lakeville and actually took a lot of their ideas and language and updated it to address the concerns of the body. We then worked through our school board, they approved it, we submitted it, and then we went to this Delegate Assembly, which is the picture here. This is where 150 school board members across the state get together and review these resolutions, and they vote them in to be part of the platform for the School Board Association. So we were able to do that. The MSBA board endorsed our resolution. The Delegate Assembly took a vote on December 2nd of 2020, and they endorsed it, and it became part of the larger platform of MSBA. So once we had this language, these ideas, we continued to work on refining it as we talked to different people. We got called right away to start testifying in January when session opened to the Senate Education Committees. We got called back a number of times. The House called us in. So Barbara and I were busy testifying. With every testimony we did, we also submitted our comments as written comments to make sure they had them. And as I said, we had a lot of help and support there. And KnowledgeWorks was very instrumental in reviewing our testimony and giving us help and support there. We're also talking to other partners across our metro area doing similar work. So we were working with Farmington still and other districts to make sure we were advocating and using language that everyone understood. As you can see on the right there, there are a number of groups we were consulting with all the way through. Education Evolving was very important. They're an organization in our state. Education Minnesota is our state teachers union, so we're having conversations with them at the same time. We're working with Senate staff because we were actually helping them draft the bill language. Senator Chuck Uyghur is a senator that represents my neighborhood, but also part of our school district, and actually is the minority lead on the Education Policy Committee. So we had a good advocate within him. And then we also were meeting with our Department of Education at the same time. As we were working through this process, a lot of questions came up that had to be addressed. In that beginning piece at the Delegate Assembly, we had people starting to question the work saying, well, you want less learning time. You're trying to take learning opportunities away from students. And so through the feedback and the questions raised, we kept refining our message and making it better. And so those consultations and opportunities were really important. People started to get very concerned about us watering down standards through this. Our language was one little paragraph in a larger innovation bill. And some people got very concerned about that because there was language in that bill around vouchers. And so we had difficulties with that because our piece was part of that bigger piece. And how can we get our piece out and keep the voucher piece away? One of the biggest problems we have when we think about the legislation is the idea of attendance. Where we're running into problems with instructional hour revolves around attendance, but MDE said, oh no, you can already do what you want to do. And they found ways they thought we could do it. And we realized some of the pieces and barriers were process and not statutory. People couldn't see the difference between changing the definition for instructional hour between elementary and secondary levels. They could very much see how students at the high school level especially could have more flexibility in their instructional hour definition, but really struggled to see what that could look like for elementary age students. Definitions became a big thing. In our state statutes, we have definitions all over the place. We have them some within the bill language we were writing, but then you have to pull up different statutes to find other definitions. We were asked many times to go compare ourselves to other states, which our policy friends and KnowledgeWorks were a big help there. Our union was very concerned about the workload for teachers, what that could mean for them, and what it means to be a licensed teacher and what students need to have a licensed teacher. Finally, our State Department of Education was very interested in the idea, but wanted to study it more. And we were ready to move and make something happen. So from that, we have now moved on to, and that's still part of our advocacy work, but we continue to move forward. And as we move forward this year, we put together another resolution around flexibility and looking specifically at high school redesign. So we took what we learned from instructional hour and we're moving forward and doing instructional hour and this concept of high school redesign. So the resolution this year was much more focused on the high school, and it was also more open-ended and written in a way that gave our government relations team, our lobbyists, more opportunities to advocate for change. We continue to have consultation with various different groups across our state, still aligns with our strategic plan. And this time we also collaborated more closely with 4 other districts who signed on to the resolution to give it more weight in the advocacy work within the School Board Association, but also as we move to working with House and Senate members. So as we wrap up our comments, one thing to remember is that we have found over time that the collaboration is key, that some of our best thinking happens through collaboration and communication with others. We have to think in terms of systems, and that's what the innovation zone language did. That's what the competency-based education did. They were big, broad systems pieces, but we also have to work around the edges, because sometimes breaking in around the edges will give us the greatest inroads to the work that we want to do. We have to think about the unintended consequences. And this is what Barb was talking about earlier with the Department of Education always wanting to say, no, you can't do that, you need a waiver. And we find there are a lot of misunderstandings. Language really matters. The wordsmithing we did with Education Minnesota, the union at the table, was very interesting. And the other thing we learned is the timeline, this work takes time, and it takes more than one session sometimes. We made really good inroads in having House and Senate members hear us last time, but we did not get a bill or bill language passed through. But we are at a good place to start that work this semester. I'm sorry, I work at university. This year. And Barb, do you want to talk about the emerging issues?
Sure. As a result of some of our work, right now there's an amendment to the Constitution being proposed by Justice Alan Page. And because of our work around advocacy, regarding student-centered learning, we are being invited to be involved a little bit more in the conversation around this, so that we have concerns about the amendment and putting that essentially calls for standards and perhaps our standardized testing to be forever, enshrined in the state constitution, which has us a little bit concerned. And so because of this advocacy work, we have some opportunities here to continue to affect the conversation. And so I think we're probably over our 10 minutes, and that's our summary.
And then one last thing before we wrap up, on the last slide, Barb, there is our contact information if people want to follow up with us. But we've taken some of the work that we've done and put it into a Google folder, which I'm going to put a link into the chat that includes sample testimony we've given, the resolutions we wrote, these slides that we're sharing now with you today. But I'll put that link in there while David is talking. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Barb. And also, if you wouldn't mind also dropping your emails maybe in the chat as well, just in case people didn't catch them when that last slide was up, I think that'd be great. Well, David, that is a tough act to follow, but I know that you are up for the challenge. So can we hear about Kentucky?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's always hard going second. Thank you, Emily and John, for allowing me to be here to talk about Kentucky's fairly long history with trying our best to do innovative things. There's always a joke around here that I'm from Kentucky and I want to be first, which sometimes isn't the best thing in the world, because that means that you have to hit all the potholes, and then other people see what you do and they fix it, and it looks better in other places. But we are happy with the history and the journey that we've taken. Most of what I'm going to talk to you about today is our current work, and that has a huge policy implication. But after I did the slides, I thought I didn't really talk much about where we've been. So I threw one quick slide at the front of this thing that's got everything all on one slide, but I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can. But if you have any questions about it during the other half of the hour, I can certainly talk about it, because it's put us where we are today. So I will, there we are. Okay, so we've been doing this, as I said, a while in Kentucky. I came to the state agency in 1 year after this, 1998. But in 1997, we passed legislation allowing for performance-based credit, which is probably the first thing we ever did, which allowed students to be able to demonstrate mastery of learning in a way other than a time-based course. So it was our first attempt at thinking about the concept of seat time. It was at the time probably pretty radical. Now it doesn't do as much. We've been working hard lately to fix it, because it was very simple when we did it in 1997, and it's needed a lot more work. In 2010, the Council of Chief State School Officers formed the Innovation Lab Network, and Kentucky was a founding state of that network. And it allowed for us to create allowed us to be a part of a national network, but also allowed us to create a state network. So we began with probably 12 districts, and today we still have that network in place, and we have about 35 districts involved in our Innovation Lab Network, which we've modified the name a little bit to Innovative Learning Network, but it's the same idea, and it's a place where districts can come and share their ideas and learn from each other. 2010 was huge for us as well, because we enacted the non-traditional instruction legislation, which was at the time the first statewide remote learning legislation in a state. And obviously, thank goodness we had it a decade before the pandemic hit. So we had about half of our districts in Kentucky already doing remote learning when the pandemic hit, which was obviously tremendous help, because those districts served as mentors to districts who had never done it. And it really helped us as we had to go through all of the pandemic that everybody's had to go through. In 2013, we enacted kind of an innovation zone concept, which was the Districts of Innovation program. It still exists. And that allowed districts to request flexibilities to certain statutes and rules on the books. 2017, we began a consortium of districts sort of inside our network that started to work on what we now most of us call the profile of a graduate work, but it was an effort to begin to think about competency-based education and begin the conversation with those non-academic competencies. So those things like collaboration and communication and critical thinking and those kind of things. So we developed a set of what we called anchor competencies, and we also developed performance outcomes that showed us across grade spans from second grade all the way through 12th, what would competency look like for a kid in critical thinking at second grade, that sort of thing. 2019, the state modified our graduation requirements, and we split high school in half. The first half of high school now in Kentucky is standardized. Every student basically has the same set of courses that they're working on, English 1 and 2, math 2 math courses, so forth. And in previous to 2019, that sort of model moved all the way through high school. We had a set of courses. So not only did we have a credit requirement, but we told kids what credits those would be. We said, these are the credits you have to have. We stopped that in 2019 and said, after the sophomore year, you still have to have math credits and English credits and science credits and social studies credits, but you get a greater choice in what those are. So if you're a CTE kid and your pathway is this, these are the English classes that make the most sense for you to take, as opposed to a kid who's pre-med ideas, thinking about pre-med, who needs a different set of courses. So we began that work, and that continues on as we build out ways to help support districts in actually doing something with that new flexibility. And then we get to 2021, where we are today. And that's what I'm going to run through some slides about the work that we're involved in today. So in 2020, during the pandemic, we welcomed a new commissioner of education in Kentucky, Dr. Jason Glass, and he hit the ground immediately with these notions of how he wanted to change the future of education in Kentucky. And the first thing that he wanted it to be about was a shift in the way we thought about engaging the community. And he wanted everything about what we would design for the future to be coming from the communities and not coming from us and policymakers and going down to the communities. He wanted them to tell us what they felt was important in their communities, and we would bring that conversation up and then engage policymakers around what the communities were telling us. So these are 4 goals. I'll just stick on this slide for just a second. You can read them pretty quickly. But these are the goals of this project. By the way, the project is formally called Reciprocal Learning Partnerships. It has a lot of pieces to it, but that's the overarching conversation. But the ideas here focus a lot on assessment and accountability, but they really touch all the parts of the education system. But these are really about trying to figure out ways to rethink assessment and accountability in Kentucky. Reciprocal accountability. So the notion that accountability doesn't flow one way, it flows back and forth from the state to the local, to the classroom, to the community, and all the places go back and forth and that notion. We began in the spring of 2021 with the commissioner's listening tour, which unfortunately had to be virtual, but we did 13 virtual listening sessions across the state. We did them regionally, and including sessions in Spanish. And we got thousands of citizens of Kentucky coming to those sessions and saying, basically the commissioner asked them a couple of questions. He said, tell us about your experience in the Kentucky public education system, and then tell us what would have made it better, in essence, is what he asked them. And from that, we garnered this reams of information that led us to the second part. Well, this is a quote from Dr. Glass. I forgot I left that slide in there. Beginning of learning, anything meaningful starts with curiosity. And that's where he started every one of those listening tour sessions. He wanted people to think about the fact that many times we tend to take the curiosity out of kids as we push them through our systems. And there's just an example of that. From those listening tour conversations came the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education. So we took all of that data, all of those comments from citizens of Kentucky, and we said, here it is. And we asked this coalition, which was 60 people from across the state, all different stakeholder groups, and I'll mention that real quickly in a second. And that group went through the process of looking at all of that information, and from it, coming up with a set of 10 themes that seem to be prevalent in all of it, and then taking those themes and saying, okay, if these are the 10 themes that we're hearing, how do we connect that and align that to what students' needs are? And how do we develop systems that are specifically and most directly beneficial to helping those students achieve the things that were in those themes, which is what the communities and the state seem to be telling us they thought was important. So that group met over the summer of 2021. They developed 2 reports, one called The Current State of Education in Kentucky, one called The Future State of Education in Kentucky. That coalition was the first time in Kentucky in my remembrance, and I said I had been here a while, that we used a radically inclusive design process for identifying that coalition real quickly. It's nice that there's 3 honeycombs up here. There were 3 parts to the coalition. A third of the coalition was identified by the Department of Ed. It included legislators, state board members, superintendents, etc., teachers, principals, that level of people. The second third was done by an application process. So any citizen of the state of Kentucky could apply to be a member of this coalition. We had over 300 people apply for about 20 slots. Then the third was the most exciting part to me, and the most radically inclusive part of it was we went to all the organizations, particularly civil rights organizations in Kentucky, and said, we need people who would never, ever come and be a part of something like this. We need you to identify those people. and those people come and be a part. So 20 of the people were people that most people would have never thought to have even asked. They were people that represented the most disenfranchised people in our state, students in our state, people in our state. So that coalition did all that work I mentioned just a second ago. There's the things that they worked on. Again, current state report, future state report. They helped create a guidebook about how this work probably needed to be done. And they created a learning agenda, which is the exciting part that we're working on now, which was, if this is the current state and this is the future state, the place in the middle where the questions are is the learning agenda. How do we get from here to here? So we held a summit in the fall, in November of 2021, the Future of Education Summit, and we talked about all of the stuff I've just mentioned, and we got most of the state excited about this work. I was excited that we had local legislators, state legislators involved in this process from the beginning. That has helped and will be very helpful as we move forward, because I think you guys know, and our friends from Minnesota know this very well, sometimes you'll take an education initiative to the state legislature and they'll go, I don't know, what are you talking about? I've not heard about this. And somebody at the state level at the education department's been working on it for 2 years, but nobody has. So the fact that we from the beginning had leadership from our state legislature participating in this coalition, participating in the writing of these reports. Now, when we go back in our session and say, let's talk about that stuff, they'll go, yeah, I remember what you're talking about. And now we have local legislators who are participating at the local level. So it's been very helpful. All of that comes to where we are today, which is the identification of local laboratories of learning, which are communities, obviously school district based communities, but they're community driven and they're designed the same way the state coalition was designed. I'm betting I'm running out of time. That's probably, anyway, I have time to really go. This is the design process that our local school districts, communities are working through right now. What they're doing is they're asking themselves, what's their problem? What's the problem statement? What do we not think is right about the way things are happening in our current school system? And then from that, they are divining, ideating, and prototyping solutions to those problems. And they'll do that over and over and over and over again. The first honeycomb is empathizing. One of the huge parts of this whole process has been teaching local school districts how to do empathy interviews with the members of their community so they can find out what their local communities want. And at the end of the day, I think the ultimate hope of all of this is that we will have enough hard data and information to be able to share with legislators and to also share with the federal government that we need to make some huge changes to assessment and accountability in Kentucky, and probably other states do as well. And that involves thinking more locally about those things, because at the end of the day, the system that is the local system probably knows best what its students need to be successful in that particular region of the state or the world or whatever it is. And that maybe it's going to be that we don't have as much that's standardized at the state level as we do now. We still have certain things that we'll have to, but what if we allowed for flexibilities at the local level in assessment and accountability? That's just another graphic of it. There's a lot of support for this work. There's a design team. We have a partner collaborative. We're working with education partners across the country to support these folks using ESSER money, ARP ESSER money to do that. And another piece real quickly, a last piece is our personalized graduation system, which is a result of the 2019 graduation requirement change, which is rethinking the credentialing of student learning. And by that, I mean, how does credentialing happen? Where does it happen? And when does it happen? Because there's a whole lot better ways than simply putting kids in a course and saying, oh, you got an Algebra 1 credit, great. Well, no, there's standards in Algebra 1, and you may be able to learn those standards in a work-based learning experience or so what if you threw all of the standards on a dashboard and said, collect them, student, and at the end of your collection, you're done. So I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. And oh yeah, I did go way over. I'm sorry.
That's okay, David. It's a big ask to ask you all to share what is a very long story in a short amount of time, and you all did great. So thank you so much. And now is the time that we really get to dig into those experiences. We're going to start. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So in order to make this feel a little more conversational, I want participants to feel free to come off mute and ask questions. You can also drop them into the chat box if you feel more comfortable doing that. And we did already have a question from a member in our audience. David, you touched on the COVID-19 pandemic, but would any of our three panelists like to elaborate a little bit on how you view the relationship between personalized learning and the circumstances that have arisen for our students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And this attendee also specifically asked about leveraging technology in this process as well. So any thoughts to that?
I'll let Barb and Lucy respond.
Well, I can jump in. That is one of the things that we mentioned a little bit with our language matters. We have found one of the things that we talked about after the state had loosened up a lot of the requirements, in particular the seat time requirements related to the school year when we went into hybrid and distance learning. We wanted to continue that flexibility this year, but in talking about, if we referred to distance learning or hybrid learning, it brought back the feelings and anxiety of last year. And so we had difficulty moving forward with a lot of flexibility because of that language. That said, I'll also say that internally, we know students have, and teachers now have more skills to be able to use devices for anytime, anywhere learning. It's just that when we talk about it externally, it causes a lot of anxiety and worry that we're going to move into distance learning, and so we're careful during this transition, but at the same time we are doing within our district, we are leveraging those new skills and dispositions that we learned as a result of the hybrid and distance learning models that we used. I don't know if that really answers the question, but.
David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about something that sort of was born out of it in a policy way. As probably is true of every state, we had a lot of issues in terms of attendance and how do you count attendance and how do you do all that stuff as a part of long-term remote learning, which we hadn't done. Our law that I mentioned allowed for districts to do 10 days of remote learning a year. And it was obviously snow-based or weather-based, closing school, that kind of thing. But it's allowed, what we've come out of it with is the whole notion that we knew we were losing students to all kinds of other educational opportunities, whether that be online learning, schools, everything else. And so I think what we've come to post, or at least I shouldn't say post-pandemic, but at least on this side of the pandemic, is a lot more, we've designed some more flexibilities in our rules about kids being able to be full-time virtual and what that looks like and how technology has changed what that looks like and how you can actually interact with your full-time teachers but be virtual and be in the classroom even and those kinds of things. So we used to have either virtual or in person, and now we've got a kind of a continuum of the different hybrid models, as Barb was talking about, that stretch across a bunch of different needs that students might have, short-term virtual, long-term virtual, all those kind of things.
Mhm.
Brianna, I see you're off mute. Do you have a question?
I didn't. I'm not sure if there's
Oh,
another.
I'm sorry. Maybe it was hiding. Nope, never mind. So there is another question in here in our chat box about someone was asking whether you had any pushback or issues from local or statewide unions while you were doing this work.
So I can start with a statewide union and Barb can jump in with our local union. We did have meetings with Department of Education and Education Minnesota, our statewide union, and this is where that language piece becomes very important. And so some of their concerns that we thought were taken care of in the language we were putting forward, they very specifically wanted language in there to make sure it was qualified teacher, which tied to another statute somewhere else. And I learned a lot about all these other statutes and where they live and definitions and trying to find those interconnected pieces between different pieces of legislation. And so we worked really well, I feel like, with our union, because they were very honest with us to say, this word needs to be in there, this isn't clear. And we kept revising language and working together to get to that point, going back to the importance of that collaboration. And we built a really good relationship, I feel like, with some of our state level union folks, but we also had existing relationships with them because I serve a few different roles in education, and I sit on our teacher licensing board in our state. And so I was working with them on other projects as well. And so that relationship piece and that collaboration makes a real difference.
And at the local level in both districts, I've been in doing this work, a lot of, we have started every time with teacher agency being at the core of what we do. And because of that, and because that we really are intentional about honoring teacher agency, it has been very collaborative. And particularly at my previous district where I was a little bit longer and had longer term relationships before I moved here, I'd say particularly there, our teachers were really driving a lot of the work. We received some teacher powered grants from our state organization. And so as a result of that, that was really helpful to us in our design, and our teachers that were really involved in all the design process.
So next question, one of our attendees asks, what strategies did you use to garner parent or caregiver support for these initiatives?
I can keep going. So honestly, as I mentioned before, this came from our community. Our community is calling for change to our systems. It's in multiple ways. Families are saying this one size fits all is not working for my child, or it is working for my child, but I recognize it's not working for everyone. Or it is working for my child, but I can see how it could be even better if we had more flexibility. So we just haven't had, when people are engaged and understand what's going on, it hasn't been an issue. I will say that we had people who had not been involved in our strategic planning process and were having a lot of feelings about hybrid learning and distance learning would see Lucy, or there would be a tweet about Lucy testifying about instructional hours. And then we had some pushback there that said, they were saying, are you trying to not have kids come back to school? So I will say we had that moment, but that I call that more a misunderstanding in the midst of the pandemic than true pushback.
Looks like Moira has her hand raised.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I apologize. I've been trying to follow along, but I've been going in and out due to my service. But I have a question around how this is being utilized and what the presentation has been specifically around children with IEPs and 504s that we know here in Pittsburgh are struggling to get their needs met all the time. And what we've seen of this sort of personalized learning has not included any of those aspects within it. So how are you making sure that IEPs and 504s are being met in this realm of sort of personalized learning?
I'll start, Lucy and Barb, and you can. My first reaction to that, Maura, is always that's where personalized learning starts for me, because that's the first place that should be personalized. So when I think of personalized learning initiatives, I'm thinking about the fact that the whole point of them is to ensure that every learner is provided with exactly the things they need to be successful. So if you think about it that way, I have seen a lot of success in many of our districts that have been involved in a lot of our initiatives, because that's the lens through which they look at it, and they actually start with the kids who have IEPs and 504 plans. That's where they begin the conversation. And when we're monitoring programs, that's one of the first questions on our list is, please show us the ways in which you're ensuring kids with IEPs and 504s have the same opportunity to have a plan that works for them in the same way that a kid who is in the other end of the spectrum in terms of abilities or whatever their situation might be has that opportunity. So it's simply about, I think the key is you can't have personalized learning systems or opportunities unless you do them system-wide. I've heard people talk about, oh yeah, we've got 4 or 5 classrooms doing personalized learning. Well, that doesn't really work for the kids who aren't in it, because then eventually you're going to have chaos. I do know you have to start it somewhere, but that starting has to be, why don't you start it with students who may have bigger challenges than other students and go from there? And that's where I've seen it work the best.
Yeah, Maura, I'm not really sure what the model is. And this is why I think language matters a lot when we talk about, personalized learning in general. I actually am starting to, I don't use that phrase anymore, because I think it's been taken and created, it's been misused too often. So that's why I prefer maybe student-centered, but really in our district, in this district that I'm in now, we really talk a lot about agency. And personalized learning to me is really about students knowing who they are and who they are as a learner, so that they can drive their learning and they can be agents of their own learning. And that doesn't happen immediately. It's something that we have to work on and build on over time. And I would agree with David that it's systems work. It's not one classroom can do this. We really have to think of it system-wide, because students build that agency over time. They have to have experiences so that they know who they are and who they are as a learner. And those are really important things for any student, but particularly students with on IEPs and with 504s, I would suggest. So I'm not, without really knowing what your situation is, I would echo a lot of what David has talked about.
Barb, and I think you're hitting probably at my point, which is that this term is thrown around a lot without actual agency given to the people that did the most. And I think that's kind of my concern in what I'm hearing is, making sure that our kids that need the most support have it. And it sounds like, from what you're speaking of, is a different thing than what perhaps maybe Pittsburgh is trying to do right now through different foundations and things like that aren't actually speaking to the needs of our kids. So I appreciate that insight.
Great question and great discussion. We are coming up at the top of the hour here. So I just want to give our panelists an opportunity to close out with any concluding thoughts that they have. And perhaps you can touch on this most recent question in the chat about if you've seen any outcomes that show, greater student satisfaction or academic growth or emotional growth as part of the personalized learning curriculum that you're rolling out.
I'll just go quickly, Emily. I think that where we're seeing the most benefit is in engagement and in students who have a sense of belonging and being more so in the classrooms because we've given them opportunities that are not the traditional ways of doing things. I'm not sure in a lot of situations that the outcomes are any better. I do have some data that says they're not any worse. I think, again, back to the thing Barb and I were just kind of bantering about, I think if you get to a more systems-centered approach to student-centered learning, then you'll see some pretty significant outcome changes. But then that's a debate too, because apples and oranges. If a student-centered learning model provides us with different sets of measures or better sets of measures, it's really hard to compare them to some of the measures we've done for the last several decades. So that's a challenge in of itself, is what's the important stuff and how do we measure it, and then how do you compare that to something that isn't intended to, it's all different. So thank you all very much for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
So I'll jump in. As Barb and I talked about the work that we've been working on, we feel like instructional hour and flexibilities go hand in hand with accountability models. And we agree with what David is saying, that the accountability models also need to change, and we have to figure that piece out also. And we feel there's a better appetite at the legislature for instructional hour flexibilities more so than accountability model at this point in time. But it's that working around the edges, getting to the important pieces that we can make those bigger systematic changes. And so in fact, if you go in and read that resolution, it does say, get ready, we're coming towards accountability next.
Well, once again, I just want to, thank all of our three panelists and also our attendees for such wonderful questions and discussion. Just on a final housekeeping note, we do have our next core group meeting on January 19th and our next affinity group meeting on February 15th. If you're interested in learning more about the working group, and especially if you're interested in joining the policy affinity group that John and I lead, please reach out to either one of us to learn more and get involved. Our emails are on the slide. And to everyone, just thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your 2021.
I just had a clarifying question. I'm sorry. The accountability piece, who was that for? Is that for the teachers or the overall evaluation system you're talking about?
So from my perspective, I'm working on all parts of that accountability model, because I sit on our teacher licensing board, and we're looking at teacher accountability and teacher preparation accountability and all those pieces at the same time. All those systems are broken because they're all based upon single standardized test measurements.
Yes.
Right. And what are the new reliable, valid ways that we can look at accountability? And we're just starting that conversation. We're very early into that work. Barb and I have done some sessions at our state school board association, just trying to get the conversation opened at the state level, but we have a little ways to go there.
Yeah, and we just changed ours in PA actually this year, and it's just rolled out this year. So it's interesting. I've been talking with principals about it to see, how that tool can be used to bring more of the accountability towards getting things done, initiatives, things such as that. So thank you.
Aaron, I have a